Good afternoon. It is noon and Wednesday, everyone. You are watching CBC News BC. I'm Leanne Young. We're here in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. I've got your top stories. We begin with some breaking news. Renowned conservationist and chimpanzee researcher Jane Goodall has died. The Jane Goodall Institute confirmed the news this morning, saying she died of natural causes. The English zoologist was in California for a speaking tour. Goodall was known for her groundbreaking research on chimpanzees and her work as a climate and biodiversity advocate. Jane Goodall was 91. And taking you now to a live look at the rally to support the BC General Employees Union at the Vancouver Art Gallery. The union says they are expecting workers and other union leaders to join in solidarity as their job action stretches into its 5th week. This follows contract talks that broke off 2 days ago. The union's president says government negotiators presented a proposal that was largely unchanged from an earlier offer. In response, BC's finance minister says the province's budget is tight and the union doesn't seem willing to be making progress on what she calls a, quote, reasonable agreement. That rally is making its way over to Jack Pool Plaza right now. And in Kamloops, RCMP are investigating reports of a pedestrian hit by a train. It happened near the south side of the Overlanders Bridge. Access to Mission Flats Road is now blocked. There is a large police presence along the tracks. They're asking people to stay away from the area until first responders have cleared out. And BC's extortion task force has been called into Surrey. They're investigating a shooting aimed at a radio station. Surrey police say they received 911 calls yesterday about the overnight shooting.
Our officers arrived and did confirm that the damage to the front door of the business was made by gunfire. Now, fortunately, no one was injured.
Swift 1200 AM radio is among the many businesses you see there at 76 and 130th Street. Radio host Ginny Sims says her colleagues were worried about their safety, but they chose to go live on air later that day nonetheless, calling the shooting a direct attack on media freedom, and says they will not be silenced. The Provincial Extortion Task Force set up to crack down on these types of attacks is now in charge. And a high stream flow advisory is in effect for all of Vancouver Island and much of the South Coast, including here in Metro Vancouver, the Fraser Valley, and parts of the Sea to Sky region. The BC River Forecast Centre says the advisory covers the Lillooet River near Pemberton, as well as rivers in the Howe Sound area and on the Sunshine Coast. The advisories follow this weekend's storms, and more rain is expected tomorrow. A flood watch has also been issued for the King Come River on the Central Coast. Well, he wowed fans at a free pop-up concerts in Toronto and Montreal over the weekend. Then he came to Vancouver and did the same. Young people even climbed trees, as you could see here, to see Canadian R&B singer Daniel Caesar. He announced his show on Instagram just a couple of hours before. Young people raced to John Henry Park, that's over at Trout Lake. They were climbing chairs and trash cans, bike seats, basically anything just to get a good view. In an email, the park board says the show was not expected or planned. Certainly not. That's it for me for now. Thank you so much for watching CBC News BC. I am Leanne Young. Coming up next, BC Today with Michelle Elliott. Michelle will be asking you for your memories on the legacy of Jane Goodall, who has died at the age of 91. Thanks for watching and stay tuned.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Coming up at 12:30, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is set to announce details of a new energy project. For weeks, she has been promising a pipeline from Alberta to BC's coast, but with no private proponent. We'll bring that press conference to you live and hear what she has to announce, and you can call in with your reaction. First up, though, renowned primatologist and conservationist Jane Goodall has died. She was 91 years old. We'll take your calls on her message and her legacy. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. And thanks for joining us on CBC Radio, CBC Television, and live streaming as well. And you can call us now on the message and the legacy that Jane Goodall leaves behind. Our numbers are 604-669-3733. You can also dial 1-800-825-5950 or hit pound 690. You can email us bctoday@cbc.ca. She did speak in Vancouver at some points in her career, and so we'd love to hear your stories as well. Now, before we get to your calls about Jane Goodall, as I mentioned, we are expecting some big news from the government of Alberta about a pipeline project and possibly to BC's coast. So at 12:30, we will take you live to Calgary, where we are waiting to hear from Premier Danielle Smith. She has been a staunch proponent of such a project. And as we head toward that announcement this morning, BC Premier David Eby was asked about it earlier today.
The problem that we have is that Premier Smith continues to advance a project that is entirely taxpayer funded, has no private sector proponent, is not a real project, and is incredibly alarming to British Columbians, including First Nations along the coast, whose support is required for the success of the billions of dollars in real projects that I'm talking about. We need a major projects office at the federal level, not a major distractions office, not a major politics office, but an office that advances real shovel-ready projects that will move this economy forward in British Columbia and nationally. And what I am seeing from Alberta directly threatens that. So I am all for working closely with Alberta on electrical intertie that's going to drive down electrical rates for Alberta consumers. On the hydrogen sector, that is, we both need the federal government to assist us with getting hydrogen to market to build that economy. On other major infrastructure projects and projects that have real private sector backing that aren't entirely taxpayer-funded wedge politics. And that's my commitment to Albertans and to Canadians. We'll do that work with them, but it cannot be at the expense of major projects in British Columbia that are ready to go.
That is Premier David Eby speaking this morning, being asked about a possible Alberta project that would bring Alberta bitumen to BC's coast. We are awaiting a press conference at 12:30 with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. We'll bring that to you live once again and take your calls on that. Right now, Jane Goodall, the British conservationist and researcher who was renowned for her work with chimpanzees, has died at age 91. The Jane Goodall Institute confirmed her death on Instagram, saying Goodall died of natural causes. She had been in California, where she was visiting as part of a speaking tour in the United States. The United Nations just posted on X. Today, the UN family mourns the loss of Dr. Jane Goodall. The scientist, conservationist, and UN messenger of peace worked tirelessly for our planet and all its inhabitants, leaving an extraordinary legacy for humanity and nature. Now, Jane Goodall spoke recently, weeks ago, with Pia Chattopadhyay, host of CBC's The Sunday Magazine.
You launched a campaign urging people to, quote, vote for nature. What did you hope to achieve?
Well, I hope that people would begin to ask questions about the candidates and how concerned were they about the environment. Of course, people promise that they'll do things for the environment or other issues for that matter when they're campaigning. And then when or if they get into power, they don't necessarily honor those pledges. But, I mean, this this is so important. And the problem now is that people are worried about the rising costs of living in many countries. They're worried about jobs. And so the environment is getting left behind. And because governments want to really address the needs or the wishes of the people, the environment is getting pushed into the background. And this is crazy, because if we allow the environment to be destroyed, then there's no point in having a high standard of living, because the environment being gone, that's the end of us.
So if you had a word with our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, our country, as you're saying, facing a lot of issues, tariffs, cost of living, inflation, what advice would you give him, knowing that we're facing these big economic threats, that new pipelines and resource development are being eyed now? What would you say to our Prime Minister?
Well, I would say that, first of all, I want to discuss with how he felt about the importance of the environment. I would want to ask if he has any ideas about how to balance out looking after the environment with looking after the needs of the people. And I would encourage him to help grow the youth programs, because the young people are really doing an awful lot for the environment. Just, they're choosing to plant trees. They're thinking about recycling and reusing. And there are many, many things that we can do in our everyday life that will help the environment. It doesn't all have to be huge projects. And we don't have to do a huge project to clean up a river or a lake if people don't pollute it in the first place.
That is conservationist Jane Goodall, speaking just weeks ago on CBC's The Sunday magazine. Goodall has died at 91 years old. We are taking your calls about her message and her legacy. You can call us right now. Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email us, bctoday@cbc.ca, or leave a message on our TikTok Live. Thanks for joining us there as well. Joining me now is Alexandra Morton. Good afternoon. Thank you for being with us.
Good afternoon.
Really good to speak with you. I know this is emotional news to hear today. Can you tell me a little bit about what Jane Goodall did mean to
you? Jane Goodall just opened the door to my entire life, because when I was a young girl, there were no woman scientist models except Madame Curie, who I didn't want to be. And so when I saw her on the cover of National Geographic, I realized that all the passions and interests that I had in animals and in protecting animals could be the life of an adult. And so that was absolutely huge. And I have looked to her words for solace and guidance my entire life. So yeah, it's a huge shock. I know she did talk about death recently, and she said it was her next great adventure. And she's, just that was an earmark of the bravery of this woman. She faced the jungles. She also faced politicians, and she faced civil wars. She's just incredibly brave. So I guess I don't really worry about her, but I worry about all the rest of us that are left without her guidance.
What did you make of the comment she made there in terms of the concerns around affordability and cost of living superseding concerns around the environment?
She echoes my concerns. Of course, the problem is people think environment is outside of them, but we're breathing it in every second that we are drawing air into our lungs. And so the environment is us. This is about saving us, saving our children. And so I know that when people get into government, like Mark Carney, they hear all kinds of things. They're subject to the enormous gale force, storm force, hurricane force, trade winds of international trade. But he knows, our prime minister knows how serious climate change is. Certainly the insurance companies know how expensive it is, and they can't afford it. There's many reasons to act. And, Goodall, in a recent interview with the BBC, said, if we don't get it together and impose tough regulations on what people are able to do to the environment, our future is ultimately doomed. And so with her gone, it's up to us to make sure that the things that we need to survive are allowed to continue, and that's clean air, water, and food.
My guest is Alexandra Morton, biologist and author. Her most recent book, Not on My Watch, How a Renegade Whale Biologist Took on Governments and Industry to Save Wild Salmon. And we are taking your calls about the legacy and the message of Jane Goodall. The renowned British conservationist and researcher has died at the age of 91. The Jane Goodall Institute confirmed her death on Instagram today, saying Goodall died of natural causes. You can call us now. Again, what do you see as Jane Goodall's legacy? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Taking your emails as well and your comments on our TikTok Live. We have an email from Lisa who writes, I was surprised and shocked and sad to learn she had passed. She was so positive and so right regarding politicians. If only she had been the Environment Minister of Canada or the USA, how different our world would be, especially the latter country. Jane was impressive and dedicated. The world needs more Janes like her. Lisa, thank you for your email. bctoday@cbc.ca is our address. And let's go to our phone lines now. Steve is calling from Vancouver. Hi, Steve. What are your thoughts about Jane Goodall?
Thoughts are, I actually went to the Gombe National Park. I just got back 3 weeks ago. That's in Tanzania. Mm-hmm. And Kigoma is down the lake, down Lake Tanganyika, and you take a small boat up, and it's the most amazing experience, about an hour and a half, 2 hour ride just to get there. And you sign in and you pay a reasonable fee. It's like $100. And the guides take you in, and they know all the families. They know all the chimps. They all have names. Apparently, when Jane Goodall started, they weren't allowed to name. They were given numbers. And she changed everything in terms of approaches to the families. And we ended up sitting in the jungle watching a family do things. And we had to wear masks because we could transmit a virus to them. They're one of the few primates that can catch something from humans. They're that close to us. But the whole thing was fantastic. And to think that, I was there, I saw it, I was impacted by what she's done, and now she's gone. It's just actually pretty surreal.
What was her impact? Why was it important for you to visit? And this was a national park, the Gombe Stream Chimpanzee Reserve, where she started to do her research and, account the lives of the primates, Flo, David Greybeard, and Fifi, and other members of that troop. Why was it important for you to go visit?
It was important. I was there on an assignment helping small tourism operators. And there was a wonderful lady there with her crew of 4 or 5 younger folks that are all trained in interpretation. And we went along just for the experience with them and to try and make things better in terms of how to run their operation. But I'm saying there's an whole ecosystem attached to supporting and protecting these primates. And just to be part of it and see it was amazing.
Steve, thank you so much for calling. Thanks for recounting that for us. That's Steve in Vancouver. Randy writes us this email. I grew up watching Dr. Goodall revolutionize our understanding of evolution with her incredibly beautiful work with primates. Vote for nature, in quotes. The good doctor's second field of expertise and advocacy was environmental causes. We listened, we learned, we didn't do enough. Randy, thank you for the email from Burnaby. I see lots coming in now. I'll get to them in just a moment. Let me just go back to Alexandra Morton, biologist based in BC and author here as well. There's a fascination with Jane Goodall herself. She really brought a lot of attention, not just to the issues, but to herself. What was it about her that people were so drawn to?
I think it was her gentle nature and the way she explained things, her story. I mean, it's so remarkable. A secretary, of course, she had a long interest, but she was a secretary when she went into the jungles with her mother, which just seemed incredibly brave. And then, she made the huge sacrifice of leaving the jungles so that she could advocate for the animals that she had come to know, the ones you mentioned, Flo and Flint and Fifi, because she knew who they were, and she knew they needed better, and she gave up everything. She traveled relentlessly, and I think it was personal contact that so many of us had, myself included, that allowed us to understand her message. She really sacrificed for us, and I hope she's looking down at the millions of people she's inspired and knows that we are a force for good, for protection of this planet. We will carry her work forward.
Can you tell me a bit more about your encounters with her and what those conversations were like?
She got invited to a lunch with the amazing painter, Robert Bateman. And I wanted so badly to go to the lunch that I wrote to his secretary. And I even said I had good manners. This was decades ago. I just really wanted in. And they invited me. And so I found myself seated across her. And I was able to ask her, do you have hope? And she looked at me in the eye and she said, absolutely, I have hope because of people like yourself. And for me, who was completely unknown and facing, so much negativity for trying to protect salmon, that just kindled a little fire in me that burns to this day. And I am so grateful to her for that. She could have brushed me off, but she didn't. She gave me that warm, direct contact that is so important for people, the many, 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 many people like myself who are struggling against the things that we know are wrong and that feel impossible to change. And I think she made all of us feel that that was possible. And I love her so much. She's been a guiding light. People have compared me to her for a long time, but no, she was a much warmer, kinder, bigger, selfless person than I will ever be. She's remarkable that we got to spend 91 years with her on this planet. And I thank her for that.
I'm going to read an email here from Mel in Comox on that point, Alexandra. And Mel writes, part of Goodall's legacy is your guest today. So there you are. And let me just put out the numbers again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Love to hear from you. If you have a story to tell, have read her books, have watched her throughout her career, what is the legacy of Jane Goodall? Love to hear from you. You can just hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Lots of emails are coming into bctoday@cbc.ca. Anne writes, in the late 90s, I brought my young daughter to hear and meet Jane Goodall. We bought her book, The Girl Who Looked Under Rocks, and Jane signed it. Years later, that book mistakenly got donated to the SPCA store on West Broadway. When I realized, I went down there and looked through their boxes of recent donations and found it. I gave it back to my daughter where it sits proudly on her bookshelf. What a woman, such an amazing life and legacy. I hope we can carry her torch. And thank you very much for that email. Marlene writes from New West. I was sad to hear of the passing of Jane Goodall. I was a volunteer in Tanzania from 2000 to 2002. I was fortunate enough to meet Jane and visit her home in Dar es Salaam. I also was able to visit Gombe and see her chimpanzee family. She was an incredible woman, and the world is just a little bit worse off today than a world with Jane in it. May her legacy continue through Roots and Shoots, as well as every one of us. And Pam writes from West Van, years ago, I won Jane's book from the CBC when I called in to sing her praises. I still treasure it. She is one of my heroes. Pam, thank you very much. And let me just perhaps ask you, Alexandra, about her current campaigns, her most recent campaigns, one about voting. This was launched last year during the many elections that were taking place around the world, but also Roots and Shoots. I wonder what you can tell us about the work that she had been involved in. And as I mentioned, she was just in the United States doing speaking engagements there. So she was still very much active.
I know. At 91, it's incredible. Well, Roots and Shoots is just so brilliant. When I first heard she was doing that, I was like, oh my goodness, that is so long term. We need action now. But she was right that you need to educate children now because they are the future. They are now the people that are in the workforce, the voting public. And I'm sure she affected a lot of them. As for voting for the environment, I think many of us thought we did with Carney, and we're still waiting to see if we were right, if we made the right decision. But she's absolutely right. When you have people that are running to represent you, it's worth checking into whether they understand climate change and they understand the contribution of human activity and the release of carbon. Because if they don't, and they don't accept it, then you just can't vote for them, because ultimately, I think we all love our children and we have to be thinking about them. Even if you don't want to think about the other animals or anything else, this is no longer about the environment. It's about us. And I can't, it's a huge hole losing Dr. Goodall, I have to say.
Alexandra, I know this is very sad news for you to hear, and I thank you so much for joining us to speak on her legacy. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Alexandra Morton, biologist and author. It is 12:28 now. You're with BC Today. More now on the Canada Post strike. As you know, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers went on strike last Thursday after Ottawa announced major changes to the Crown Corporation to address its financial woes. We took your reaction on the open line. Here are some of your emails. Lori writes from Cowichan Bay. As a small rural business owner, we are already down 25% due to the cost of prepayment required for U.S. tariffs. So we stopped shipping to the U.S. I use Canada Post all the time because of the great service and pricing they provide right across Canada. For instance, I just dropped off a small parcel with Purolator for Whitehorse, and the cost was $29.60. We charge a flat shipping rate of $16.95 to compete in the marketplace, so we have to eat the rest of that cost. It would have been about $5 to $6 cheaper with the post office. Also, since the strike came out of the blue, I have about $3,800 in limbo with Canada Post. I don't blame the union, but I blame their management for not figuring out their business sooner. Who runs at such a deficit continually? I blame the federal government for announcing the cutbacks they want to see. I'm frustrated and angry. Rural Canada and small businesses rely on the service, and I don't think the government gets that. It should be an essential service. DB writes, the federal government says that Canada Post is insolvent. It means they do not make enough to pay the bills. Changes must be made. The union is paid to protect their workers. They are not on strike today because of wages. They are fighting for their jobs and the future of their employer. We must accept the necessary changes. Thank you for your emails. BC Today at cbc.ca. It is 12:30 now. You're with BC Today. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thank you very much for joining us. You can keep your emails coming on the legacy and the message of Jane Goodall. Coming up right after the news, we are awaiting a press conference set to begin any moment now with the Alberta Premier Danielle Smith set to speak about an energy project. So we are awaiting that announcement. We'll bring it to you live, and we'll take your calls on the open line as well. Right now, it is time for a CBC News update. And here's Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Thousands of people are marching through downtown Vancouver this hour to show support for striking public service workers. The BC General Employees Union says members of other unions are joining them in a show of solidarity. The move follows the breakdown of contract talks shortly after they resumed on Monday. Premier David Eby is once again rejecting the idea of another oil pipeline through BC. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is expected to make an announcement in a few minutes, and we will go live to that news conference when it begins. And there are concerns the slumping market for condos in Metro Vancouver could have a spillover effect on the broader economy. CMHC says about 2,500 completed condo units are sitting empty right now. That's double the number from a year ago. Some people who work in the sector say current conditions mean it's no longer economically viable to start new projects. And now the forecast on the North Coast, a mix of sun and cloud this afternoon with a high of 14. Highs around 11 with showers and a risk of thunderstorms in the Peace. In the central interior, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 16. Highs to 16 with some sun and cloud in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 19 degrees. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, some showers, a bit of sunshine with highs around 17. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Rob, thank you very much. Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC. And we are awaiting the start of a press conference in Alberta with the Premier there, Danielle Smith, set to talk about an energy project. As we mentioned earlier today, BC Premier David Eby was asked about a potential proposal. Here's what he had to say.
The problem that we have is that Premier Smith continues to advance a project that is entirely taxpayer funded, has no private sector proponent, is not a real project, and is incredibly alarming to British Columbians, including First Nations along the coast, whose support is required for the success of the billions of dollars in real projects that I'm talking about. We need a major projects office at the federal level, not a major distractions office, not a major politics office, but an office that advances real shovel-ready projects that will move this economy forward in British Columbia and nationally. And what I am seeing from Alberta directly threatens that. So I am all for working closely with Alberta on electrical intertie that's going to drive down electrical rates for Alberta consumers. On the hydrogen sector, that is, we both need the federal government to assist us with getting hydrogen to market to build that economy. On other major infrastructure projects and projects that have real private sector backing that aren't entirely taxpayer-funded wedge politics. And that's my commitment.
You're with BC Today here on CBC. And as you've been hearing, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is set to make an announcement about an energy pipeline. Energy project, rather. And for weeks now, she has been talking about the possibility of such a project, but no private proponent was announced. And so we're waiting to see what that announcement now is going to be. We are awaiting the start of this press conference, and I see that Premier Smith is walking up to the lectern now. And as I mentioned, this announcement, this scheduled press conference, it comes after months of talks between the federal government as well as provincial governments over what the federal government would deem major projects in the nation-building projects. And we heard just a few weeks ago the first few projects that Mark Carney said his government is going to back to push forward. Pipeline was not part of that announcement, but there is another list about to be announced in the coming weeks, set to be finalized in November. And so as you've been hearing, we are now going to hear from Premier Danielle Smith in just a moment. Let's go live now to this press conference as she's being introduced.
Today I'm joined, as you can see, by the Premier of the great province of Alberta, Danielle Smith. Rajan Sawhney, Minister of Indigenous Relations, and Alex Porbet, co-chair of the Technical Advisory Group. My friends, I am very excited because today we have some of the top men and women in the room today that built this province through oil and gas. And as you know, oil and gas built much of this province and much of Western Canada. We are in Alberta very excited about what we're going to do. And while we continue to diversify our products, our resources, and our markets, it will, oil and gas, remain our future for the next generation at the very least. Our government, and I think most Albertans, understand that reality. It's not news. The challenge has always been about getting our message heard in Ottawa and some of the other provinces, and making sure they understand just how vital oil is to our and Canadian prosperity. I'd like to turn the podium over to our Premier, who will tell us just how we're preparing to show Canadians from coast to coast to coast our commitment to turning this great country into an energy superpower and helping generations of Canadians have a better quality of life. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Minister, and thank you for the incredible work you've done on getting us to this point. I understand we have over 100 leaders from the energy sector in the room with us today, and it is indeed an exciting announcement, and I know you've done incredible work on it. Very pleased to be here not only with our Minister of Energy, Brian Jean, but also our Minister of Indigenous Relations, Rajan Sawhney, who has been making tons of phone calls in the last couple of days in ensuring that everyone knew who might be impacted by this, what our intentions were, as well as Alex Porbet, Executive Chair of Cenovus Energy, and one of our leading companies in the oil sands operations in Alberta. We also have representatives from the energy sector, pipeline companies, and Indigenous communities. And we've come together here today because Canada stands at a critical crossroads. Beneath our feet here in Alberta, we stand on oil reserves valued at over $9 trillion. This resource wealth presents Canada and Canadians with boundless opportunities. This wealth would equate to hundreds of billions of dollars in government revenue that could be used to support core social programs like healthcare and education, bolster Canada's national security commitments under NATO, and unlock economic prosperity for Indigenous peoples. Not only would it allow for governments at all levels across the country to fund social programs, it would generate job creation and wealth for Canadians and Albertans on a scale rarely seen in recent decades. This type of transformational wealth cannot be kept in the ground, and Canadians agree. Over the past 6 months, it has become clear that Canadians nationwide see the tremendous opportunity that we have to unleash the economic potential of our energy sector. In fact, recent polling has shown that 3/4 of Canadians support building a new oil pipeline. Additionally, the global demand for oil is increasing, and the world wants more Canadian oil and gas. We've heard this from Asia, in Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, and Indonesia, to name a few. We've heard this from Europe, and we know that we need to deliver on global energy security efforts. There are billions of people around the world living in energy poverty who demand a higher standard of living. This is not just a question of Alberta's energy, it is a global moral imperative. What stands before us right now is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to unlock our wealth of resources and become a world-leading energy superpower, creating lasting prosperity for generations to come. But to realize this potential, the federal government must make meaningful and substantive reforms to Canada's regulatory environment to revive investor certainty. The simple fact is that you will not see companies sink billions of dollars into new major projects unless the federal government overturns or overhauls its Trudeau-era anti-resource development policies. And that includes the oil and gas emissions cap, which we know is a production cap, Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines law, and the tanker ban, which have made investment in new oil and gas projects extremely difficult. And this is what we've heard from industry and potential investors. They will not invest in a new pipeline with these bad laws and regulations in place. You can't build a pipeline to the Northwest Coast and still have a tanker ban. You cannot have an emissions cap that is so aggressive that companies would have to shut in operations in order to achieve it. And you can't have enthusiasm to export natural gas and win the AI data war and then have punitive policies against using natural gas on Alberta's electricity grid. Now, I've made this case abundantly clear to the Prime Minister, and what I can tell you is this, that I am more optimistic now than I have ever been over that the concerns of Albertans are finally being heard. While we still have details to work out, I do look forward to reaching an agreement that will profoundly benefit Alberta and Canada's economies. Major investment is what grows our economy, creates jobs, prosperity, and enhances our standard of living. And without question, a new oil pipeline to the Northwest BC coast would have the greatest economic benefit of any new nation-building project. For example, had we completed the Northern Gateway project, the Energy East project, and the Keystone XL pipeline project, Canada's GDP today would be $55 billion stronger each and every year. We cannot let another opportunity of this economic magnitude pass us by again. And that's why we are announcing that the government of Alberta will be the proponent of an oil pipeline to the Northwest BC coast, with the support and technical advice of 3 major pipeline companies, including Southbow, Enbridge, and Trans Mountain. Our government will make a formal application to the Federal Project Office under the Building Canada Act. Today, we are beginning the engagement process with Indigenous groups across Alberta and British Columbia to ensure that they can be part of this nation-building effort. That conversation must begin with Indigenous engagement, not as a checkbox, but as a foundation for relationship building, trust, and shared leadership. This will lay the groundwork for full and thorough consultation as this project meets regulatory milestones. To be clear, though, this is about more than just fulfilling a legal duty to consult. It's about working together from the beginning to ensure that we get it right this time, informed by Indigenous perspectives and experiences. We also want to have Indigenous partners at the table as owners to participate not only as holders of territory, but as co-owners of a project and an asset that will provide wealth for First Nations for generations. Our Indigenous Relations team, led by Minister Rajan Sawhney, will develop and lead an engagement plan in collaboration with First Nations across both provinces. You'll hear more details about this from the Minister shortly. And to get this nation-building pipeline project underway, Alberta's government is committing $14 million to the technical design and detailed application design. To be clear, Alberta taxpayers will not be on the hook to build this pipeline. But this initial investment is crucial to get this important work underway, and we cannot let billions in investment and future revenues continue to flee our nation. We have worked closely with our pipeline companies to chart a path forward so that we can provide a detailed plan to be approved by the federal government. This work will be guided by an expert advisory committee with a dedicated full-time project management team that includes the top pipeline experts in North America. And it is my hope, with Alberta as the proponent, that we will see this pipeline project on the next list of nation-building projects announced by the federal government come Grey Cup in November. With today's announcement, Alberta is prepared to answer the call to support global energy security efforts while creating lasting prosperity for Albertans and Canadians for generations to come. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to the Minister.
So Calgary, are you excited? I said, are you excited? We've waited a long time for this. I'd like to turn it over to Minister Sawhney now for a few words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Jean, and thank you, Premier Smith, and thank you to all of you for being here today. It means a lot to us. Today's announcement is about more than a planning initiative. It's a chance to reimagine how we build partnerships, not just pipelines. We know that prosperity depends on partnership, and partnerships begin with trust. Alberta's government is committed to a principled approach to Indigenous engagement, one that starts early, listens deeply, and puts communities at the center of decision-making. Indigenous communities are not just partners, they're rights holders, leaders, and knowledge keepers. Their voices must shape the path forward. Projects like the Cedar LNG and Solis Sims LNG show us what's possible when Indigenous communities lead. It's not just about inclusion, it's also about ownership. That's why we're engaging Indigenous communities in Alberta and BC from day one, starting at the very beginning of project design. We've learned from past mistakes, and we want BC First Nations to know that we've heard you loud and clear. We're committed to getting this right. Over the past few days, Minister Jean and I have spoken directly with leaders from nations in both provinces. And over the coming weeks and months, our ministries and the project advisory team will be reaching out to all nations along the potential routes. That includes engaging communities upstream, midstream, and downstream from any potential site or route. We're engaging on everything from route specifics and environmental protections to opportunities for Indigenous ownership, equity stakes, and long-term prosperity. This is about more than infrastructure. It's about economic reconciliation and building lasting prosperity together. Nothing is locked in. We are here to listen, share information transparently, and ensure Indigenous voices shape
David, right?
decisions that affect their lands, their livelihoods, and their futures. This initiative lays a foundation for trust, for opportunity, and shared leadership, values that will shape the future of energy development in Canada. Together we can build something meaningful. Thank you once again for being here today. I'll hand it back to Minister Jean.
You are listening to Alberta's Indigenous Relations Minister Rajan Sawhney. Now, as you've been hearing, before her was the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, announcing that the province of Alberta will act as a proponent for a pipeline project to bring Alberta oil to BC's north coast. And the province is spending $14 million on the design of the project. Smith said that Alberta taxpayers will not be on the hook for building the pipeline. They are working with the advice and technical support of 3 pipeline companies as well. And so the Alberta government, acting as a proponent, will develop and submit a formal application for a project to the federal government, that federal major projects office that has been created under the Building Canada Act. And as you heard the Premier of Alberta say, that there is a second tranche of projects set to be announced or finalized come November. We are taking your calls on this. Your reaction to the announcement from Alberta that they will be the proponent for the design of a pipeline project. No final route has been finalized. They are designing right now, and so Alberta will be the proponent and backing that, spending $14 million. Our number is 1-800-825-5950. 604-669-3733, or you can just hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca and also send us your comments on our TikTok Live. In a few moments, we'll hear from our CBC Provincial Affairs reporter in BC as well, Katie DeRosa, standing by with more context on this. Right now, let's take a call from David in Nanaimo. Hi, David. Your thoughts on the announcement from Alberta?
Hi, thanks so much. Well, Premier Danielle Smith talks a good game and a big game about the economic vision for this, but the reality is so much different because we have China and Asia are decarbonizing. They're electrifying at a speed that we in Canada have no real concept of just how fast and furiously they are getting off oil and coal and even LNG, and moving to clean energy that is better for them for so many reasons, for their fishing economies, for their other resource economies that rely on a more stable nature, and so they're moving that direction so fast. So this is a product that Asia doesn't want. Why would we be spending billions of taxpayers' money on this pipeline? Which is why there's no proponent behind this project, no private equity saying, yeah, this is a good idea, this will bring in profit, because they know this would need to be taxpayer funded for it to be financially anything, because Asia doesn't have the demand.
David, thank you very much. And as per the announcement today, the province committing right now to $14 million on designing the project, and what will come of the building of that pipeline, remains to be seen. So thank you very much for your call. Again, our numbers, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And you can just hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Emails are coming in, and do send us your thoughts, bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining me now for more on this is our CBC BC provincial affairs reporter, Katie DeRosa, joins me now from Victoria. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Michelle.
What's your, can you give us your summary of what you heard from the Alberta Premier this afternoon?
Well, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith acknowledged that the Alberta government will be the proponent for this pipeline project that she hopes that Mark Carney's new major projects office will support. But she said that there are 3 pipeline companies that will be consultants that will guide that proposal. And she said that no company will put forward its own proposal if there are policies that discourage the oil and gas sector, such as the oil tanker off BC's north coast, the moratorium on tanker traffic off BC's north coast, as well as an emissions cap on oil and gas. So she says those are policies that will scare off any potential private sector companies. So she didn't let that deter her for putting this project forward, saying Alberta is sitting on $9 trillion worth of gas reserves, and it's needed to fuel our economy and supercharge our economy.
And she did say that she's been having conversations with Prime Minister Mark Carney and said she felt optimistic after those conversations. We did hear from BC Premier David Eby earlier today. What did he have to say about this potential project?
Well, he said that he did get an advance call from Danielle Smith telling him about this announcement. He said that the conversation was cordial, but he asked her, is there a private sector proponent? And she said no. So that is what led the Premier to several times say this is not a real project, saying that, BC has other projects such as the North Coast Transmission Line, LNG projects that are better for supercharging the Canadian economy. And he says that there is no possibility for building this pipeline without billions of dollars in taxpayer support, and he's not willing to back that. And he got a little bit more fired up later on in the press conference where he said, do not mistake my politeness for weakness when it comes to protecting our Canadian economy and our coastline. So he says if the government of Alberta and the federal government intend to put billions of dollars of taxpayer money into this pipeline, they should be transparent about it.
And so what might this mean then, hearing from David Eby today and of course the announcement from Premier Smith just now, what might this mean for BC-Alberta relations?
Well, we know they've been at odds over this pipeline. Again, there's no indication right now that the federal government is going to lift the moratorium on tanker traffic. That's something the Premier continues to support. But I think that this is an area where the 2 premiers are able to talk and discuss this, but have different positions. However, that's all based on this hypothetical project. However, if we see this project get support from Ottawa, it could be a totally different story in terms of that relationship between these 2 West Coast neighbors.
So what are the next milestones for this idea then, Katie?
Well, it was, we were told perhaps late October, November could be the next time that we hear another announcement from the Major Projects Office on the next tranche of projects. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says she wants this project on that next round. We'll have to see if that actually happens and get a sense of what projects the Prime Minister is prioritizing. Certainly the Premier wants to see more BC projects on the next list. He went to Ottawa 2 weeks ago to advocate for those projects such as the North Coast Transmission Line and the expansion at the Port of Vancouver. So those are the projects the Premier is pitching. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is pitching the pipeline, and we'll have to see where the next batch of projects lands.
Katie, thank you so much. That's CBC's BC Provincial Affairs reporter Katie DeRosa. Much more from her throughout the day on this, of course. Let's take some of your calls now. James at Spencis Bridge, your reaction to this announcement from Alberta.
Oh, good day. The Premier in her news conference said there's $9 trillion in reserves of oil in the oil sands, and that the province would be obtaining hundreds of billions of dollars in revenues from that oil, extraction of that oil. And that is a very bad deal for Albertans. Only getting hundreds of billions of dollars out of $9 trillion. Extremely bad deal for Albertans. They're getting a bad cut for royalties. And the Alberta government should be building refineries to add value to that oil rather than building pipelines to sell it abroad where wealth will be created abroad. The Americans, in a news conference earlier this year with the Premier stated that Americans earn $3 off of every dollar of oil Alberta sends to them. They're earning trillions of dollars. Albertans are not.
Okay, so not a good deal for Alberta taxpayers, in your view, James. Thank you very much.
Not a good deal.
Yeah, Sylvia, our next caller now in Nanaimo. Hi, Sylvia.
Hello.
Hi there. What are your thoughts? Yeah.
I think I'm very concerned about the announcement, and for a number of reasons. Most importantly, we have made commitments internationally in respect to climate change, climate targets, and all of these projects keep rolling out, which add to the carbon budget, add to emissions, and there's no one taking a look at checks and balances in terms of what we've committed to do and what these projects are going to commit us in terms of emissions.
Thank you.
Secondly, is about the First Nations. So oftentimes you see that First Nations are being brought on as project proponents or partners, but the is that in a way, it's a way to get the projects through the regulatory process, it appears to me, but I'm wondering whether there's a real honest conversation about what those impacts of climate change will be on those communities. So it's not informed consent from the point of view of understanding what climate impacts will be.
Sylvia, thank you so much for your call. One last email here. Thank you so much for sending them to bctoday@cbc.ca. Elizabeth writes, it sounds as though Danielle Smith is getting a little ahead of herself. And by making this grand announcement prior to approval, it makes me shake my head. When the project is not approved, will this possibly be another reason for her to call for secession? This is a sunsetting industry, like it or not. I do hope it does not gain any traction. Elizabeth, thank you. You can keep sending your thoughts. bctoday@cbc.ca. Much more coverage of this throughout the day here on CBC. Stay tuned. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks for joining us.